I'm Tennessee real estate broker Charlie Neese, and while I do all types of real estate, I specialize in land and farms in the Nashville area. And if this is the year you've decided you're going to be buying your piece of property to build your dream house, or maybe have as a recreational property, spend time with friends and family, or maybe even start a homestead, well, there's lots and lots of due diligence to go through prior to closing when you're doing a deal for raw land. Here are 5 things that can trip you up and you need answers to before you close when you're buying that property. The very first thing that you want to check out is make sure that there are no restrictions on that property that will keep you from building or doing what you want to on that property. Some people think that only subdivision properties have restrictions, but that is not the case. Any property you buy, whether it's 5 acres, 1 acre, or 100 acres, could have restrictions placed on it. And a lot of times that was when it was originally divided. Maybe the farmer who owned the original property was going to remain in the house on 5 acres and it was going to sell off the rest, but that farmer wanted some level of control of what was going to be built around. So maybe you've got restrictions on how small a house you can build. Maybe you even have restrictions on what type of farm animals you can have on that property. So that is the first thing. You want to have the title company do a title search and search that deed to make sure that you can do what you want to on your property and that there are no restrictions that would prevent you from doing that. Well, one of the worst things that can happen to a new landowner when they go to apply for a septic permit for their new home and it's denied because you don't have the soils that you need on the property. For instance, here in Tennessee, we do septic systems by number of bedrooms, and if you need a 4 or a 5 bedroom house, but the soils will only support a septic system for a 2 bedroom house, then you can't build what you need and you can't get approved what you want. In some cases, they may make you move the house site or the septic site to another part of the property, but if it doesn't have the view that you want, you may not want to do that. Or in some cases, if you choose to keep the home in the same location as you want, but the septic system is far away, that can be incredibly expensive to build out, to make a septic system far away work with a home on another site. So make sure that when you go to buy a piece of property, before you close, ask the seller, do you have a current septic permit for that property? If they don't, do you have a soil evaluation for your property? Because even though that's not a permit, it'll give you a good idea of where the best soils are and what's likely going to be approved for that piece of property. If the seller doesn't have any of those resources, then strongly consider having a soil scientist come onto the property that you hire to evaluate the soils to see if you can build what you want to build where. So one thing that is sometimes unaccounted for when doing due diligence is if you plan to build a home on that property, most counties have a requirement for a minimum amount of road frontage. If you don't have that minimum amount, you cannot easily get a building permit. You're going to have to get an exception and go through that process, even if it's going to be available at all. So one of the very first things you should do is to find out how much is the minimum amount of road frontage that you need to build to get your building permit. So one thing that can surprise many landowners when they start to take a look at the cost of building their new dream home on their land is how much the infrastructure costs. Many will account for the per square foot price of the house, but not the infrastructure to support a house on a piece of rural land. For instance, if you have an ideal of, I want to be way back off the road, I want to build 1/8 of a mile back off the road, well, just the cost to build that infrastructure can be tens of thousands of dollars, if not more. To build a driveway that's 1/8 of a mile long, even gravel from scratch, tens of thousands of dollars. If you want to build fencing around your property, tens of thousands of dollars in general. Even if you want to just bury a water line from the road to your house, they're going to charge you per foot to do that, and that can be very expensive. If you don't have access to city water and you need to dig a well, then in my area, the average cost of a well is about $10,000, but it can go much higher if you have to dig very deep, or you have to dig multiple wells because you've hit sulfur water or something like that. To run an electric line from the road back to your house 1/8 of a mile, especially if you're going to bury it, can be very expensive. You can save a lot of money by going overhead, but if you are going to bury that line, again, you're going to have extensive costs in doing that. So do your due diligence on the front end. Start to get an idea of how much it's going to cost to do that infrastructure to your house if you have that ideal place on the property that you want to build. And if you can't build it there, you don't want the property. One of the most important things you can do when you're buying a piece of property is have a title search done. Do not skip this. If you're using a lender, they're going to require it. But even if you're buying in cash or you're doing owner financing, make sure to do a title search. A title search is going to show very important information like, are there any liens on the property? Does anybody else have a claim to the property? Are there any easements on the property for use or for access that benefit others? Those easements give people access or use of your property. And for many of you, you don't want that. So make sure to check for easements. Check for those restrictions that I talked about earlier. Those restrictions can limit how you use the property or what you put on the property or what you build on the property. So those title searches are very, very important to give you as much information as you can get about your property. So my motto when it comes to land and farms is always know before you close. Don't find out after you close that you can't do what you want to do. And I've only covered 5 important questions in this video. I'll cover more in others, but I strongly encourage you, hire a good land and farm agent when you're purchasing a piece of property. They can help you in the due diligence, know what questions to ask, and also know how to get those answers so that you do know before you close.